The afternoon sun beat down on the wagon yard like a punishment from God himself, turning the packed dirt into something between stone and fire. Dust hung in the air, thick enough to choke on, and the crowd that had gathered smelled of sweat, tobacco, and something darker, the kind of anticipation that only comes when men forget what decency looks like. Caleb Voss stood at the back of that crowd, his hat pulled low, his jaw set tight. He'd come to town for fence wire and grain, not this, never this. But here it was anyway. The auctioneer stood on a makeshift platform of stacked crates, his voice booming across the yard like he was selling livestock. And in a way, he was. "Next lot," the man called out, his grin wide and yellow-toothed. Young, healthy, no family to speak of, clean work history, been with 3 families already, so she knows how to keep a house. Caleb's stomach turned. The girl was brought forward by 2 men who gripped her arms like she might bolt. She didn't struggle, didn't scream, but her eyes, God, her eyes, were wide and wet, darting across the faces in the crowd like she was searching for someone who might stop this. She couldn't have been more than 13. Her dress was faded calico, patched at the elbows and hem, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders in tangled brown waves. Her wrists were red where the men had grabbed her. She kept her head down, but Caleb saw the way her lips trembled, the way her small hands knotted together in front of her. "I'm too young to be a wife," she whispered. The words weren't loud, barely more than a breath, but in the brief silence between the auctioneer's pitch and the murmur of the crowd, they landed like a stone in still water. Someone laughed. Caleb's fists clenched. Now, the auctioneer said, waving a hand dismissively. "Nobody said nothing about a wife, girl, your bane sold for labor. Housework, cooking, tending animals, honest work, ain't nothing to cry about." The girl's shoulders shook. She didn't look up. Caleb had seen auctions before. In the years after the war, when the dust of Reconstruction still hung over everything, shadowy dealings like this had sprouted in the cracks of broken law and order. Men who'd lost everything found ways to profit off those who'd lost more. Girls and boys with no kin, no land, no protection, they disappeared into contracts that might as well have been chains. 4 years after the war ended slavery, and here it was again, wearing a different name. The auctioneer raised his hand. "We'll start the bidding at $30, 30 for a girl who can work, cook, and keep quiet. Who'll start me at 30? A man near the front raised his hand, older, thick-armed, with a face like weathered leather. 30. 30 I got, do I hear 35? Another hand, this one from a rail-thin man with a scar down his cheek. 35. The girl's breath hitched. She looked up for just a moment, and Caleb saw her face clearly for the first time. His heart stopped. That scar. Just below her left ear, a thin white line that curved toward her jawline. He knew that scar. He'd seen it before. 8 years ago. A farmhouse, smoke rising, a little girl clutching a rag doll while soldiers dragged her father out into the yard. Caleb had been there, not as a soldier, he'd been too young to fight, but as a hand on a neighboring ranch, watching from the tree line while the world burned. He'd done nothing. He'd watched the Garrison family lose everything, land, livestock, dignity, and he'd ridden away because his boss told him to, because getting involved meant trouble, because it wasn't his fight. And now here she was, Eliza Garrison, older, thinner, broken in ways he couldn't see but knew were there. 40, someone shouted. Caleb's throat went dry. 40 I got, do I hear 45? The rail-thin man grinned. 45. Eliza's knees buckled. One of the men holding her yanked her upright, and she gasped, her eyes squeezing shut. "I'm too young," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "Please, I'm too young." No one listened. Caleb's mind raced. He had $60 in his pocket, enough for the wire, the grain, and a few supplies to last through winter. If he spent it here, he'd go home empty-handed. His ranch, small, struggling, barely holding together, would feel it. But if he didn't? 50, Caleb said. His voice cut through the crowd like a blade. Heads turned. The auctioneer's eyes narrowed, scanning the crowd until they landed on Caleb at the back. 50 from the man in the back. Do I hear 55? The rail-thin man glanced over his shoulder, sizing Caleb up. He spat into the dirt. 55. Caleb's jaw tightened. 60. Silence. The auctioneer grinned. 60, $60 for a strong young worker, anyone else. The rail-thin man shook his head and turned away. The older man with the weathered face just shrugged. The auctioneer's gavel came down. Sold to the man in the back for $60. Caleb's stomach twisted. He pushed through the crowd, his boots heavy on the dirt, his heart hammering in his chest. When he reached the platform, he pulled the money from his pocket and handed it to the auctioneer without a word. The man counted it, bit one of the coins to test it, then nodded. She's yours. The two men holding Eliza let go. She stumbled forward, her eyes wide and glassy, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She looked up at Caleb, and for a moment there was nothing but terror in her gaze. Come on, Caleb said quietly, let's go. She didn't move. He didn't reach for her, didn't grab her arm or pull her along. He just turned and started walking toward his wagon, and after a long, trembling moment, she followed. The crowd parted. Some men watched with curiosity, others with suspicion, a few whispered. Caleb didn't look back. When they reached the wagon, he climbed up onto the seat and waited. Eliza stood beside it, her hands still knotted together, her eyes locked on the ground. You can sit up here, Caleb said, or in the back, your choice. She didn't respond, just stared. After a moment, she climbed into the back of the wagon, settling into the far corner among the empty crates and old canvas. She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, making herself as small as possible. Caleb picked up the reins. As the wagon rolled out of town, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the valley. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Eliza didn't make a sound. But Caleb could feel her eyes on the back of his head, and he knew she didn't remember him. Or maybe she did. And that was worse. The ride back to the ranch took 2 hours. Caleb didn't speak, neither did Eliza. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels, the rhythm of the horses' hooves, and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. When they finally pulled up to the small ranch house, weathered wood, sagging porch, a barn that needed new shingles, Caleb set the brake and climbed down. He walked around to the back of the wagon and stood there, waiting. Eliza didn't move. You can come down now, Caleb said. She stared at him, her face pale, her hands gripping her knees. I'm not going to hurt you, he added. Her eyes narrowed. Everybody says that. Caleb exhaled slowly. I know. He turned and walked toward the house, leaving the wagon door open. After a minute, he heard the soft thud of her feet hitting the ground. Inside, the house was small but clean. A single main room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. A second door led to a smaller room, barely more than a closet, where Caleb kept supplies and tools. He gestured toward the bed. You can sleep there, I'll take the floor. Eliza stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. Why? Why what? Why did you buy me? Caleb set his hat on the table and ran a hand through his hair. Because no one else should have. Her expression didn't change. That's not an answer. He met her gaze. I didn't buy you to own you. Then what? I don't know yet. Silence. Eliza's eyes flicked around the room, taking in every corner, every shadow. She was calculating, planning, figuring out where the exits were, where the knives were, how fast she could run. Caleb recognized it because he'd done the same thing once. There's bread and cheese in the cupboard, he said. Water in the pitcher, help yourself. She didn't move. He walked past her, out onto the porch, and sat down on the top step. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The valley stretched out before him, quiet and endless. He heard her footsteps behind him, slow, cautious. She sat down on the opposite end of the porch, as far from him as she could get, and hugged her knees again. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then finally, Eliza said, "I know you." Caleb's chest tightened. "I've seen you before," she continued, her voice flat. "A long time ago." He didn't respond. "You were there," she said, "the day they took our farm." Caleb closed his eyes. "You were standing in the trees," she went on, "watching. You had a black horse and a brown hat. I remember because I thought maybe you'd help, but you didn't." He opened his eyes and looked at her. She wasn't crying. Her face was hard, carved from something that wouldn't break anymore. "You're right," Caleb said quietly. "I was there, and I didn't help." "Why?" "Because I was a coward." Eliza's jaw clenched. "And now you think buying me makes up for it?" "No." "Then what do you want?" Caleb turned to face her fully. "I want to give you a choice. Stay here, work if you want, leave if you want. I'm not going to stop you, but if you stay, you're not a slave, you're not a servant, you're just here." She stared at him, her eyes searching his face for the lie. "I don't believe you," she said. "I know." "Then why should I stay?" "Because you've got nowhere else to go." It was harsh, true, and it landed like a fist. Eliza's expression cracked, just for a second, and Caleb saw the little girl from 8 years ago flicker across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by the hard shell she'd built to survive. "I could run," she said. "You could. You'd come after me." "No, I wouldn't." She didn't believe him. He could see it. "My father used to say," Eliza began, her voice distant, "that men who do nothing are worse than men who do harm. Because the men who do harm, at least they choose. But the men who do nothing, they just let the world burn and tell themselves it wasn't their fault." Caleb's throat tightened. "He was right," she added. "Yeah," Caleb said, "he was." Eliza stood up, brushing the dust off her dress. She looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "I'll stay," she said, "for now, but not because I forgive you, because I don't have a choice." "Fair enough." She turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind her. Caleb sat there on the porch, staring out at the darkening valley, and let the weight of her words settle over him like a stone. He'd spent 8 years trying to forget the Garrison family, trying to convince himself that what happened wasn't his fault, that he'd been young, that he'd just been following orders. But Eliza's words cut through every excuse he'd ever made. And the worst part, she was right. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. Caleb stood and went inside. Eliza was sitting on the bed, her back against the wall, her knees pulled to her chest again. She didn't look at him. He grabbed a blanket from the cupboard and laid it on the floor near the fireplace. "Good night," he said. She didn't respond. But as he lay down and closed his eyes, he heard her whisper, so quiet he almost missed it. "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. 3 days passed. Eliza kept to herself mostly. She didn't run, didn't speak much, but she helped around the house, mending a torn shirt, sweeping the floor, fetching water from the well. Small things, quiet things. Caleb didn't push, didn't ask questions, just gave her space. On the 4th day, the danger arrived. It came in the form of hoofbeats. Caleb heard them first, low and steady, growing louder. He was out by the barn, fixing a broken fence post, when he looked up and saw the dust cloud rising from the road. 3 riders. His stomach sank. He set down the hammer and walked toward the house. Eliza was inside, kneading dough at the table. She looked up when he entered, her hands stilling. "Someone's coming," Caleb said. Her face went pale. "Who?" "Don't know yet." He walked to the window and looked out. The riders were closer now, their shapes becoming clear against the horizon. The man in front was tall, broad-shouldered, with a badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff Dalton. Caleb recognized him immediately, the same man who'd overseen the auction, the same man who, 8 years ago, had led the soldiers to the garrison farm and called them traitors to the Union just so the land could be claimed by men with deeper pockets. The two men flanking him were hired guns. Caleb could tell by the way they rode, loose in the saddle, hands near their holsters, eyes scanning the property like wolves looking for weakness. "Stay inside," Caleb said. Eliza's hands trembled. "What do they want?" "I don't know, but stay inside." He stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind him. The three riders pulled up in front of the house, their horses snorting and stamping. Dust swirled around their boots. Sheriff Dalton leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes cold and calculating. "Caleb Voss." "Sheriff, heard you made a purchase in town a few days back." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's right." "Where is she?" "Inside. I'd like to see her." "Why?" Dalton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Because I got a complaint. Man says you interfered with a lawful transaction, says the girl was promised to him. She was sold to me, fair and square." "That's a matter of interpretation." One of the hired guns, a wiry man with a scar down his neck, spat into the dirt. "Just bring her out, Voss. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Caleb didn't move. "She's not going anywhere." Dalton sighed like he was dealing with a stubborn child. "Look, Voss, I don't want trouble, but the law's the law. If there's a dispute, I gotta investigate. Now bring her out, or I'll come in and get her myself." "You step foot in my house," Caleb said quietly, "and we'll have a different kind of problem." The second hired gun, a thick-necked man with dead eyes, reached for his pistol. Caleb's hand didn't move, but his voice dropped lower. "You pull that, you better be ready to use it." The man hesitated. Dalton raised a hand. "Easy, boys, easy." He looked at Caleb, his expression hardening. "You know who I am, Voss. You know what I can do. I can make your life ride difficult, or I can ride away and forget this whole thing. Your choice." Caleb held his gaze. "I know exactly who you are, Dalton. I know what you did to the garrisons. I know you burned their farm and called them traitors so you could sell their land to the highest bidder. I know you're the reason that girl in there has nothing." Dalton's smile vanished. "And I know," Caleb continued, his voice steady, "that if you try to take her, I'll put a bullet in you before you get off that horse." Silence. The wind picked up, rattling the loose boards on the barn. Dalton leaned back in his saddle, his hand resting on the pommel. "You're making a mistake, Voss." "Maybe. You can't protect her forever." "I can try." Dalton studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, have it your way." He turned his horse and gestured to the two hired guns. "Let's go." They rode off, dust rising in their wake. Caleb stood on the porch, his heart pounding, his hands shaking just slightly. He waited until they were out of sight before he turned and went back inside. Eliza was standing by the window, her face pressed against the glass, her breath fogging the pain. "They're gone," Caleb said. She turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "For now." "Yeah, for now." She crossed her arms, her voice trembling. "Why did you do that?" "Do what?" "Stand up to them. You could have just given me back. It would have been easier." Caleb met her gaze. "Some things are worth standing for." Her expression cracked just a little. "You think that makes it better?" "No." "Then why?" "Because 8 years ago, I didn't stand, and I've been living with that ever since." Eliza stared at him, her eyes searching his face. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "It wasn't forgiveness, but it was closer." That night Caleb sat on the porch again, watching the stars. The air was cool, the valley quiet except for the distant howl of a coyote. The door creaked open behind him. Eliza stepped out, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She sat down beside him, leaving just enough space between them to make it clear she wasn't ready to trust him yet. But she was here. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Eliza said, "My father used to take me out at night to look at the stars." Caleb glanced at her. "Yeah." He said the stars were proof that no matter how bad things got, there was still something beautiful in the world. "He sounds like a good man." He was. Silence. "I'm sorry," Caleb said quietly, "for what happened to him, to your family." Eliza didn't respond right away. She just stared up at the sky, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. "I used to hate you," she said finally. Caleb nodded. "I know. I still do, a little." "I know." But she hesitated. "You didn't have to do what you did today. You didn't have to stand up to them." "Yeah, I did." "Why?" Caleb exhaled slowly. "Because I'm tired of being the man who does nothing." Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met, her expression softened. "My father would have liked you," she said, "not for what you didn't do, but for what you're trying to do now." Caleb's throat tightened. "I'm not trying to be a hero, Eliza. I'm just trying to do better. That's all anyone can do." They sat in silence for a while longer, the stars stretching endlessly above them. Then Eliza said, "If you're still reading this story, I want you to think about something. If you were Caleb, would you have stood up to the sheriff? Would you have risked everything for someone you barely knew? Pour yourself a cup of tea, take a breath, and really think about it. And if you want to see how this ends, tap subscribe so you don't miss what happens next." She smiled faintly, like she was speaking to someone far away. Caleb didn't understand, but he didn't question it. The next morning, Eliza was up before dawn. Caleb found her in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." "Then why are you?" She glanced at him. "Because I want to." Caleb leaned against the barn door, watching her work. Her movements were careful, deliberate. She wasn't just brushing the horse, she was connecting with it, trusting it. "You're good with them," Caleb said. "My father taught me." "He taught you well." Eliza paused, her hand resting on the horse's neck. "He taught me a lot of things, but the thing I remember most is this. He said that trust isn't something you give, it's something you build, one small act at a time." Caleb nodded. He was right. She looked at him over her shoulder. "Are you trying to build my trust, Caleb?" "I'm trying." "Then keep trying." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door left open. Over the next few days, something shifted. Eliza still kept her distance, but the distance was smaller. She started sitting at the table during meals instead of in the corner. She asked questions about the ranch, about the whores. Ease about the valley. And Caleb answered, honestly, patiently. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Eliza said, "Tell me about the day you saw my father." Caleb stilled, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Please," she added, "I need to know." He exhaled slowly and sat down. "I was 17, working for a man named Carter. He owned a big spread east of your father's land. One morning, soldiers came through, saying they had orders to clear out families who'd sided with the Confederacy during the war. My father didn't side with anyone. I know, but the soldiers didn't care. They burned the farm, took the livestock, and dragged your father away. I was watching from the trees. Carter told me to stay put, said it wasn't our fight." "And you listened?" "Yeah, I listened." Eliza's eyes glistened. "Did you see me?" "Yes, you were holding a doll. You were crying." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I remember that doll. I lost it that day." Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of cloth, faded blue fabric with a bit of stitching still visible. "I found this," he said quietly, "in the dirt after they left. I kept it. I don't know why." Eliza stared at it, her hands trembling. She reached out and took it, holding it like it was made of glass. "Thank you," she whispered. I should have done more. You're doing it now. And for the first time, when she looked at him, there was no anger. Just something softer. Something like hope. The trouble came back a week later. This time, it wasn't just Dalton. Caleb was working on the fence line when he heard the hoofbeats. He looked up and saw a group of riders cresting the hill, 6 of them, including Dalton and the 2 hired guns from before. His stomach dropped. He sprinted back to the house. Eliza was inside, reading an old book he'd given her. "They're back," Caleb said. "More of them this time." Her face went pale. "What do we do?" "You hide, back room. Don't come out unless I tell you." "Caleb." "Go now." She hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into the back. Caleb grabbed his rifle from above the door and stepped outside. The riders pulled up in front of the house, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Dalton sat at the center, his expression cold and satisfied. "You had your chance, Voss," Dalton said. "Now we're taking the girl, and if you get in the way, we'll take you too." Caleb raised the rifle. "Not happening." One of the hired guns laughed. "You gonna shoot all 6 of us?" "I'll start with him," Caleb said, pointing the barrel at Dalton. Dalton's smile faded. Then, from behind the riders, a voice rang out. "Caleb." Everyone turned. A group of men on horseback emerged from the tree line, ranch hands from neighboring spreads. Men Caleb had worked beside for years. Old friends, good men. At the front was Lyle Carter, a grizzled rancher in his 60s. He rode up beside Dalton, his shotgun resting across his saddle. "Dalton," Lyle said, his voice calm but hard. "I branded calves with you 20 years ago. Don't make me shoot a man I once called friend." Dalton's jaw tightened. "This is lawman business, Lyle. Stay out of it." "Lawman business," another rider, a younger man named Ben, laughed bitterly. "You mean the same lawman business that burned the Garrison farm, the same business that's been lining your pockets with dirty money for years." Dalton's hand moved toward his pistol. Lyle cocked his shotgun. "I wouldn't." The tension crackled like lightning. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Dalton exhaled slowly and lowered his hand. "This isn't over." "Yeah," Lyle said, "it is." Dalton turned his horse and gestured to his men. They rode off, dust rising in their wake. Caleb lowered his rifle, his hands shaking. Lyle dismounted and walked over. "You all right, son?" "Yeah, thanks, Lyle." "Don't thank me, just don't make a habit of pissing off the law." Caleb managed a faint smile. "I'll try." Lyle glanced at the house. "The girl okay?" "Yeah, she's inside." "Good," Lyle clapped him on the shoulder. "You did right, Caleb. Don't let anyone tell you different." The other riders tipped their hats and rode off. Caleb stood there for a moment, letting the adrenaline drain from his body. Then he turned and went inside. Eliza was standing in the doorway of the back room, her eyes wide. "It's over," Caleb said. She didn't move. "Are you sure?" "Yeah." Slowly she stepped forward, and then, for the first time, she crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around him. Caleb froze, surprised. Then, gently, he put his arms around her. She didn't say anything, just held on. And Caleb realized this was what forgiveness looked like. Not loud, not grand. Just quiet and real. 3 months later, the ranch had changed. Eliza was still there, but not as a servant. She worked alongside Caleb, mending fences, tending the horses, planting a small garden near the house. She smiled more now, laughed even. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Eliza said, "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About staying for good." Caleb looked at her. "You don't have to decide that now." "I know, but I want to." "Why?" She smiled. "Because this is the first place that's ever felt like home." Caleb's throat tightened. And because, she added, I think my father would have wanted me to forgive you, not for what you didn't do, but for what you're doing now. Caleb nodded slowly. I'm still trying. I know, and that's enough. They sat in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the valley in gold and crimson. Caleb's thought about the Garrison farm, about the little girl with the doll, about the years of guilt he'd carried. And he realized redemption wasn't a single act. It was a lifetime of small ones. Years later, travelers passing through the valley would see the ranch and wonder about the man and the young woman who lived there. Some said she was his daughter. Others said she was a ward he'd taken in. But the truth was simpler. She was family, and that was all that mattered. The sun set, the stars came out, and in the quiet of the valley, two people who'd been broken found a way to heal. Together.